The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was my ex-girlfriend asleep in a plastic hospital chair, her hand wrapped around mine as if letting go might kill me. Sunlight poured through the blinds behind her, turning the small room pale gold, but her face looked drained of every color. Her hair was tangled, her sweater was stained with coffee, and dried tears marked both cheeks. For one terrifying second, I thought I had died and somehow awakened inside the one memory I had spent 2 years trying to forget. Then the machines beside me began beeping faster, pain tore through my ribs, and she lifted her head. Claire Whitmore stared at me with red, exhausted eyes and whispered, "I was here all night." Before I tell you why the woman I had broken was the only person beside me when I woke up, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe kindness can survive anger, forgiveness can outlive heartbreak, and even people who have lost their way deserve hope and second chances. My name is Grant Holloway, and until that morning, I believed success meant never needing anyone. I was 34, the owner of a rapidly growing construction company in Portland, Maine, and the kind of man who answered personal questions with jokes because honesty felt too much like standing unprotected in winter. My father had walked out when I was 9, leaving my mother to work 2 jobs and pretend she was not exhausted. I had watched her struggle, and I made myself a promise that I would never depend on another person for stability. Years later, I confused independence with strength and emotional distance with control. Claire had loved me for 5 years despite that. She was a physical therapist with a patient voice, a stubborn sense of hope, and an instinct for seeing pain before people admitted they were hurting. She knew when I was afraid, even when I raised my voice to hide it. She knew when I needed comfort, even when I pushed her away. For a long time, she believed love could teach me to stay. Our relationship ended on a bright spring afternoon 2 years before the accident. Claire had come to my office carrying 2 sandwiches and a small envelope containing photographs of a cottage near the coast. We had once dreamed of buying an old home, restoring it together, and filling it with mismatched furniture, loud Sunday breakfasts, and the family neither of us had grown up with. She placed the photographs on my desk and said the cottage was affordable if we were willing to start small. Instead of seeing a future, I saw a trap. My company had just won its largest contract, and fear twisted itself into ambition. I accused her of pressuring me, distracting me, and trying to make decisions for both of us. She did not shout back. She simply asked whether I actually wanted a life with her or only liked knowing she would wait while I built one without her. I could have told the truth. I could have admitted I was terrified that loving her gave her the power to leave me. Instead, I said maybe we had been pretending for too long. I watched something collapse behind her eyes, yet pride kept me seated while she gathered the photographs and walked away. After Claire left, I worked harder than ever. I expanded the company, hired more crews, purchased newer trucks, and moved into an apartment overlooking the harbor. Everyone called me driven. No one knew I often remained at the office until sunrise because going home meant facing rooms where nothing asked me to speak. I heard through mutual friends that Claire had accepted a position at a rehabilitation center across town. She volunteered at a community clinic, adopted an elderly dog, and stopped asking anyone about me. Whenever her name came up, I acted indifferent. Secretly, I searched for her face in every crowded restaurant and grocery store. I drafted apologies I never sent because each one required me to admit that the breakup had not happened because I stopped loving her. It happened because I loved her enough to be afraid. The accident occurred on a clear Tuesday morning in October. I had been driving to inspect a renovation project outside the city when my project manager called about a structural issue. I was exhausted after several weeks of deadlines and had ignored a pounding headache since breakfast. At an intersection near the river, a delivery truck ran a red light. I remember the blast of its horn, the violent flash of metal, and the windshield folding inward like shattered ice. My vehicle spun into a barrier. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was a stranger shouting that help was coming. Later, I learned I had suffered 3 fractured ribs, a severe concussion, internal bleeding, and a deep cut along my shoulder. Emergency surgeons stopped the bleeding, but my blood pressure dropped dangerously low. The doctors could not guarantee I would regain consciousness without complications. When paramedics searched my phone for an emergency contact, they found Claire's number still listed beneath the word home. I had never changed it. She was treating a patient when the hospital called. According to one of the nurses, she arrived less than 20 minutes later, wearing her work shoes and carrying no coat despite the cold. She signed paperwork, contacted my mother in Vermont, answered questions about my medical history, and remained beside my bed while the medical team monitored me. My mother was delayed by road construction and did not reach the hospital until the following morning. Claire could have left once she knew I was stable. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she stayed through every uncertain hour, speaking to me while I lay unconscious, reminding me of the people waiting for me and the life I still had time to change. When I woke after sunrise, I did not know any of that. I only knew Claire was holding my hand. The moment she realized I was awake, relief crossed her face so openly that it hurt more than my injuries. She called for the nurse, then tried to pull her hand away, but I held on. My voice came out weak and broken as I asked why she was there. She looked toward the window and said the hospital had called because I had never removed her as my emergency contact. I asked why she had stayed. Her expression tightened, as though the answer was both simple and unbearable. She told me that leaving a wounded person alone was not who she was, even if that person had once left her alone emotionally. Her words were quiet, but they struck every place in me the crash had missed. My mother arrived shortly afterward, filling the room with frantic relief. Claire stepped back while nurses checked my pupils and adjusted my medication. I watched her gather her bag, expecting her to disappear before I could say anything meaningful. Panic rose in me, sudden and humiliating. I told her I was sorry. The apology sounded small against 2 years of silence. Claire paused but did not turn around. I tried again, admitting that I had rehearsed better words countless times but had always chosen cowardice over discomfort. I told her she had never asked too much of me, she had only asked me to stand beside her in the future we had already imagined together. I confessed that I had blamed her because blaming her was easier than admitting I was afraid. She finally looked at me, tears gathering in her eyes, and said regret did not automatically repair damage. I knew she was right. Claire left that morning after making sure my mother understood the discharge plan. I remained in the hospital for 6 days, long enough for the swelling to fade and for shame to sharpen into clarity. The surgeon explained that if the internal bleeding had continued much longer, I might not have survived. Each afternoon, sunlight crawled across the floor while I thought about the years I had spent protecting myself from abandonment by abandoning everyone first. My mother sat beside me and finally told me what she had never said when I was young. She said my father's departure had hurt her, but what hurt more was watching me build my entire identity around a man who had chosen not to stay. She reminded me that strength was not refusing help. Strength was trusting people enough to let them see what could break. After my discharge, I moved temporarily into my mother's house while my ribs healed. For the first time since childhood, I allowed someone else to cook for me, drive me to appointments, and see me struggle. I delegated responsibility at work instead of treating exhaustion like proof of importance. I began therapy with a counselor named Rebecca Sloan, who had an unnerving ability to wait through silence until I stopped hiding inside it. She helped me understand that I had spent years treating vulnerability as a debt another person might collect later. I started writing down every apology I owed, not just to Claire but to employees I had dismissed, friends I had neglected, and my mother, whose love I had accepted without ever acknowledging its cost. 3 weeks after the accident, I sent Claire a letter. I did not ask her to come back. I did not tell her nearly dying had magically transformed me. I wrote that I understood apologies without changed behavior were only requests for immediate relief. I thanked her for staying at the hospital and told her I was beginning the work I should have done years earlier. I also wrote that she owed me nothing, not forgiveness, friendship, or another chance. I mailed the letter and forced myself not to wait for a reply. She did not respond for nearly a month. Then, one sunny December afternoon, she sent a brief message asking whether I wanted to walk with her along the waterfront. The air was cold and bright, and the harbor glittered under a cloudless sky. Claire arrived wearing a gray coat and carrying 2 cups of coffee. She looked familiar and completely changed, as if the woman I remembered had learned how to protect herself without becoming hard. We walked slowly because my ribs still ached. She told me about the rehabilitation center, her dog, and the small apartment she had made her own. I listened without steering the conversation toward us. Near the end of the walk, she admitted my letter had made her angry before it made her hopeful. She said part of her had wanted me to suffer the way she had suffered, but another part was tired of carrying anger into every new day that we did not reunite then. Claire made it clear that forgiveness was not the same as trust, and trust could not be demanded on the strength of one emotional morning. So we began with something smaller. We met for coffee every other Sunday. I attended therapy. She maintained boundaries. When I felt insecure, I practiced telling the truth instead of withdrawing. When she felt uncertain, she said so without apologizing for protecting her heart. There were difficult afternoons when old wounds surfaced and neither of us knew whether rebuilding was wise. Once, after I canceled lunch because of an unexpected work crisis, Claire went silent. The old version of me would have accused her of overreacting. Instead, I drove to her apartment after the crisis was resolved, stood in the daylight outside her building, and admitted I had failed to communicate. I did not defend myself. That simple act did not erase the pain, but it showed her I was learning to remain present when discomfort arrived. 6 months after the crash, Claire invited me to volunteer at her community clinic. I spent a Saturday repairing loose cabinets, repainting a waiting room, and building a wheelchair ramp with 2 of my employees. Near noon, I saw her comforting an injured teenager who feared he would never play soccer again. She listened with the same steady compassion she had once offered me. I realized her kindness had never been weakness. Staying beside my hospital bed had not meant she had forgotten what I did. It meant she refused to let my failures decide the kind of person she would become. That afternoon, we sat outside the clinic beneath a budding maple tree. Claire told me she had forgiven me months earlier, not because I deserved immediate release, but because resentment had kept part of her tied to the day I rejected our future. She said she was ready to stop living inside that moment. Then she asked whether I still had the photographs of the coastal cottage. I admitted I had found them in a folder she left behind and carried them from office to office for 2 years. She smiled through tears and said the cottage had been sold long ago. For once, the loss did not feel like punishment. It felt like a lesson. Some opportunities disappear, but the ability to build something meaningful can remain. A year after the accident, Claire and I purchased a different house, not as proof that everything had returned to normal, but as evidence that we had created something more honest than what existed before. It was a weathered blue home near a park, with crooked floors and a kitchen flooded with morning sunlight. We restored it slowly. I learned that plans could change without becoming failures. Claire learned that caution did not mean she had stopped believing in love. My mother chose the curtains. Claire's elderly dog claimed the warmest spot by the front window. On the day we finished painting the porch, I found Claire standing in the yard, studying the house with tears in her eyes. I walked toward her and asked whether she was happy. She said she was, but happiness was no longer the most important thing to her. Peace was. Trust was. Knowing that when life became frightening, neither of us would disappear was. I thought about the hospital room, the plastic chair, the morning light, and her exhausted hand wrapped around mine. I realized she had stayed all night not to rescue our relationship, but to protect the human being beneath all the hurt. Her compassion saved my life in more ways than the doctors could record. Before we close this story, leave a meaningful comment sharing whether you believe forgiveness should be earned through change, or whether compassion can sometimes begin before a person deserves it. Your words may help someone who is struggling to release anger, admit a mistake, or take the first brave step toward healing. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Claire and I eventually married on a clear summer morning in the backyard of that blue house. There were no grand decorations, only wildflowers, close friends, my tearful mother, and sunlight spilling through the maple branches. During my vows, I did not promise I would never be afraid again. I promised I would no longer let fear make my choices. I promised to speak when silence felt safer, to stay when old instincts told me to run, and to remember that love was not a threat to my independence but an invitation to become more courageous. Claire squeezed my hands and cried, and for the first time in my life, I did not look away from someone else's tears. Sometimes I still wake early and find her sleeping beside me while daylight gathers at the windows. In those quiet moments, I remember the morning I opened my eyes in the hospital and discovered that the person I had hurt most had refused to leave me alone. I cannot change the years pride stole from us. I cannot erase the afternoon I broke her heart. But every day, I can honor the mercy she showed me by becoming a man who stays. And whenever life feels fragile, Claire takes my hand exactly as she did beside that hospital bed, reminding me that second chances are not given so we can return to who we were. They are given so we can finally become who love always believed we could be.